Welcome to the Millyard Museum. My name is Jeff Barraclough. I'm the Executive Director of the Manchester Historic Association and the Millyard Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this morning to this, what I'm sure will be a very interesting talk about the bricks that built Amoskeag. Before I introduce our speaker, I just have a couple of upcoming events to announce. First of all, coming up on Saturday, December 6th, is our holiday open house. This is our annual open house for the holidays, and we're really excited to be having a bunch of activities available that morning. We have our very popular American Girl doll tea party that will be beginning at 10 o'clock. Tickets are available for that, so if you have any young ladies in your life who like dolls and tea parties, it's a really fun program that we incorporate the history of the Millyard and of the different eras of American Girls. So we encourage you to sign up for that. All day, it is an open house. People can come in. There are crafts for kids. There are a variety of activities. There are discounts in our museum shop. So it's really a fun, festive day. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, local author Bob Perot, who I believe is here. Yes, hello, Bob. Bob has a new novel that he has just published called Courtship in Purgatory, and he'll be talking about that novel and doing a book signing, so I hope you can all come out for that at 2 o'clock. And then at noon, Santa Claus will be coming as well, so it'll be fun to have him here and bring some kids, and they can sit down and talk to him. Also, before you leave here today, if you're interested in our classroom discovery gallery right back here, we have our stitchers working on the America's Tapestry project. This is a nationwide project in conjunction with the America 250th celebration that will be happening next year. And there are 13 panels that are being stitched for representing each of the 13 original colonies. And the New Hampshire panel is being stitched right here in the Millyard Museum up through, from a few months ago, up through the end of April. And so they are hard at work. If you're interested in learning more about that or even stitching yourself, please talk to the ladies in there. And it's a really great opportunity to celebrate our nation's history. And then once the tapestries are all completed, they will be traveling around the country on display, and they will be coming here to the Millyard Museum in early 2027. So everyone will get a chance to see all 13 here. So again, I want to thank you all for coming. The Manchester Historic Association is a member-supported organization. I know many of you are members, and I just want to thank you all for your continued support. If you're not a member and would like to learn more about member benefits and becoming a member, please speak to me after or any of our trustees. Jeff, there are many. If you're a trustee, do you mind just raising your hand? I know we have many in the audience. So thank you all, and I'm sure any of them would be happy to talk to you more about the organization as well. So it's now my pleasure. Yes. Would you like to? We have a special underwear exhibit, and our Director of Education, Christy Ellsworth, will tell us about it.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure they see it. All right. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christy Ellsworth. I'm the Director of Education here. I have many passions, including teaching fourth graders the history of this amazing city, but also American Girl dolls, so sign up for the tea party, as well as historical undergarments. So we have a brief history of briefs in the other room, pun intended, and it is a wonderful, humorous walk through specifically ladies' undergarments and the struggle for the perfect silhouette. So please definitely check that out. It will be up for a little while, but it is certainly a don't miss. So enjoy the talk about bricks.
Thank you, Christy. So be sure to check that out, as well as behind this screen is our other temporary exhibit up right now called Amoskeag Revisited, on basically celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Amoskeag exhibit that debuted at the Courier Museum in 1975, and really focusing on the photography that was done by Randolph Langenbach, an architectural historian who curated that original exhibit and documented through his photography what the Millyard looked like intact before urban renewal, and then as some of the urban renewal project began and some of the buildings began to be demolished, he documented that through his photography. So be sure to check that out as well. behind the screen here. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this morning, Jeffrey Myrdek. Jeff is the Vice President of the Board of Trustees of the Historic Association. He is a great supporter of this organization and has a passion for researching local history and has done some phenomenal work researching the history of the bricks and their origins. So it's my pleasure to welcome Jeff Myrdek. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. I got interested in this topic many years ago when I was doing some research and reading about Amoskeag manufacturing in the mills, and I saw a little sentence about bricks coming from Hooksett, and I was pretty interested in that. That's all there was. There was no other information. So I retired last year, and I had some time on my hands, and I started to research the topic. And this is the results of the research, and at the end of the presentation, I'll give credit to all the people that helped me pull this together. So I want to thank you for being here and hoping to learn more about the topic at hand. I'll ask you to hold your questions to the end, mainly because probably the answers to your questions are going to develop as we go through the material. I'm not trying to make you brick makers, so at times, this may get a little complicated, but I hope you enjoy it. It's a mixture of history and of some, real interesting information about how to make bricks, if you're interested in making bricks. So, the purpose of the presentation is to give you a general background and understanding of the history of the Hooksett brickyards, their contribution and development to the Amoskeag mills, the city of Manchester, and beyond. What I mean by beyond, the manufacturing of the Hooksett bricks not only contributed to the mills in Manchester, but believe it or not, also Lowell, Lawrence, buildings as far away as Worcester, Massachusetts. So that's an important thing. We can't stress the importance of this work as far as how far it went and the great contributions it made. That's the chimney that used to be in the Millyard on the west side. Now, many of you may have gone to the Millyard restaurant. Many of you may remember that chimney. That was one of the tallest structures in the state of New Hampshire for many, many years. So, how we're going to look at this presentation is we're going to look at a brief history of brick making in New England, the discovery of clay in New Hampshire and Hooksett. We're going to look at how red clay bricks are manufactured. When I was young, we used to call those Kelly bricks. I don't know why we called them Kelly bricks, but we used to call them Kelly bricks. We're going to look at the procurement and delivery of bricks to Manchester. And we're going to look at the background on the Head family and their business. One of the most important families in the town of Hooksett. Fascinating family. So now we're going to get into the introduction. This narrative is a collection of several sources listed in the bibliography at the end of the document. This information and photos collected are taken and compiled into this PowerPoint presentation, also noted at the end of the document. I want to acknowledge several organizations and individuals that assisted me in finding the material referenced in this project. Most residents of both Manchester and Hooksett have no idea of the significant historical connection between the two communities as it relates to very significant happenings in the history, such as Manchester City Hall, many schools, the Amoskeag canals, the mill buildings, and the great individuals and families from Hooksett that deserve credit and gratitude for their contributions to Hooksett, Manchester, and the state of New Hampshire. Many of you may know what that is. Maybe some of you have gone for a ride in the reproduction in the Piscataquag River in Portsmouth. Some of the first brick manufacturing in New Hampshire was recorded in Dover, and it was noted in 1792 that it was first used as ballast in vessels going to the British West Indies. So if you have a ship, especially a wooden sailing ship, and even in ships today, you have to have a ballast to keep the ship stable. So for whatever reason, besides stones, they used bricks to put in the bottom of the ship to keep the ship stable when it went to sea. Also, rivers were the first method to move large volume of bricks over great distances. Keep in mind, no tractor trailers, okay? So we had to use rivers to move goods. This photo depicts one of the gondolas used to transport goods, and in this case, bricks from the Dover down the Pasquatasquag River. Dover was one of the first towns in New Hampshire that was developed in the early periods of New Hampshire. The same method was used in the Merrimack River to move bricks from Hooksett to Manchester and all the way to Boston from 1793 to 1853 until the railroads replaced the riverboats as a transportation method. Now, I'm going to leave this up. If any of you are interested to come and view this, I realize you can't see it, but this is a model of the Middlesex Canal that existed from 1793 to 1853. It started in the Billerica, Mass area and basically went all the way to Boston. This is one of the greatest engineering marvels that was ever built. This was all built by hand. This allowed goods from New Hampshire to get all the way down to Lowell and then migrate through Middlesex County, all through man-made canals and existing water bodies, and get to Boston. Okay? Only parts of this exist today. There's a museum you can see in Billerica, and it has highlights of this. And it does talk about canals in Manchester. Hopefully that stays. Put it here. There were canals in Manchester that aren't really very visible today. If you went to the Bridge Street Bridge and you looked to the north, there are little islands. They look like islands. There were canals along the mills in the river where barges used to float down with goods. Lumber, bricks, all kinds of goods that used to go all the way down to get down to Boston. Now, at certain times, they had to be portaged from the river onto wagons to get around the falls and back down. So, interesting thing. Many people don't know about that. Again, 1853, what happened? The railroads. The railroads put the Middlesex Canal out of business. So, away from the coast, transportation was always a problem. Bricks had to be made as close as possible to the place they were needed. This is why brick houses inland in New Hampshire were almost unheard of. Even today, there's not many masonry homes. This is why brick houses, the main use of bricks was for chimneys, and the homeowner himself may have participated in the brick-making process. You're going to see that process when I show you the YouTube video. So if you read along here, the culture and technology involved came from England. You know, being from New England, a lot of what we received in culture and practices came from our forefathers in England. And we see that there was also a great direct influence in the building material and construction methods. So when you look back to the 17th century, you believe it or not, there was a lot of regulation, even though there wasn't a lot of formal government. But as you can see, the construction of housing, even back then, was somewhat regulated for the protection of the homeowner. Brick molds were specified so that the finished product would be more or less uniform. And you can see that today. It's amazing when you look at older brick structures, how uniform and neat they are, even 200 or 300 years ago. So you look back at the American, before the start of the American Revolution, and you look towards our neighbors in the South in Massachusetts, and you look at the brick molds. And many of you may not have picked up a brick and actually measured it, But, you know, I've noted up there the sizes of a typical brick. And there was some variation in the sizes, and I'll explain more as we get into how you make a brick and what happens to a brick in the manufacturing process. But there were regulations about New England bricks, and there were laws involved in that process. And so it gets real important because, I don't know if any of you have ever watched a mason or have ever seen how bricks are laid, but if bricks aren't uniform, you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems with the walls being level. You're going to have problems with things being uniform. If you ever look at a wall and look how level and neat it is, that really depends on the quality of the bricks. Very important. It's really amazing if you look at good masonry work, how straight and level it is. So if you look at this picture, this is the Henry Brickyard in Elliott, Maine. It's across from the Piscataquag River in Dover. So what you're seeing here in the brickyard is laborers, and you're seeing bricks, and you're seeing what you're going to learn a little bit more about is a kiln in the center. And we'll go into more detail as we move along. This is a building in Harvard. Okay. As the 20th century commenced, numerous brick manufacturers in New Hampshire discovered growing market for products as a conventional building material. The highest demand was for water-struck brick in scove kilns. A scove kiln is earthen materials are built up around the kiln. The kiln is a fire-built structure that bakes the bricks. There's different kinds. You're going to see kilns in here that have a fire with wood, and it's a different kind of structure, where a scove kiln is an earthen works. So, and water-struck bricks are bricks that are designed to be on the exterior that are waterproof. And we talk about Harvard bricks, which was a design of bricks. And again, it gets its name from Harvard College. If you've been down to Cambridge and Alstead, you see all the Harvard buildings that were built. So that was a design that came forward. And, you know, this is a New England architectural type design, and many knowledgeable architects practiced it. And that's a design that was very popular. You see it all over New England. You see it in many colleges. And it actually spread really throughout the eastern United States. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a YouTube video of some homesteaders. And I want you to look at the brick making process that they're following. The only difference between that process, in the beginning, how they make the bricks is the same as they made the bricks in Hooksett. There is one difference as far as when they're molding the clay by hand. In Hooksett, they used a plug mill, and we'll get into greater analysis of that later. So if technology serves me correctly, I'll be able to get this started without a problem.
Hooksett here, we're using exactly the same tools, techniques, and materials that they would have used in ancient times. A simple clay, sand.
That's as loud, I apologize. It's as loud as I can get it. I'm sorry.
We've been on this homestead for more than
If
a
you
year,
click the
and it's
CC
time
button,
to
it'll
work
put
on
subtitles
permanent
up there.
structures. Everything we've
If you
done
click
so
the
far has
CC
been
button
very
at the bottom of the
contemporary.
YouTube
We
video,
built
it'll
out
put
wood
subtitles
without
up there.
built out raw clay. We need to build permanent
There you go.
things.
Thank you.
Bricks
You're
are
welcome.
part of that solution. Impervious building blocks. That's what we're going to be making today. We're going to be hand making bricks. Right?
Yeah.
Sorry. Pay attention to the young lady. You can tell that they didn't rehearse this.
On the clay from the start, getting the rocks out, the sticks, the roots that might be stuck in our clay, because the clay we're working on is surface clay. We haven't dug down 100 feet to get this perfect into the brick with our brick mold. So the brick mold has been wetted, it's got sand in it, and then force the clay down into the mold. And it's a dirty job. It flings clay and mud, sand everywhere. We need to strike this off, getting all our excess clay off. We can do it with our hands, we can do it with a board. I'm going to put a little bit of sand on the top to give us a nice smooth surface. And then I hand it off to the person who demolds the brick. So she's going to take it over, shake the brick out, and it's got to sit there on the drying spot. And then the mold comes back and goes back in the water, and the whole process starts over. So he's always working on clay, he's working on the loaves, I'm molding up the bricks. She's getting rid of the bricks, putting them on the drying spot.
So here where they're molding that clay, that later on is done with what's called a plug mold, and you'll see pictures of that.
Endless possibilities right now.
Ads have to pay for these YouTube videos. And I am a premium member, but I'm not set up in the premium mode for this, so I apologize.
The molds for making bricks, very important. There are lots of different styles.
Pretty
and
arduous work.
and a lot of
Now you imagine doing this for 1 million bricks.
all the way
Okay.
around it that holds it together.
Now you're going to learn later the effort is a little different, but still, these are homesteaders that are doing this.
That metal on the top is actually in the laws written in Massachusetts in the 17th century to keep
She got a little used to the
out and
slamming of the clay.
continue using your mold even after it wasn't making the brick of the same size anymore. So the government was trying to regulate the exact size of a brick, and you were punished if your bricks weren't the right size. If we use an all wooden mold, like one of these down here, then we continue to scrape away as we take the clay off the top, our mold will start to get caved in, and then our brick isn't brick shaped anymore. We don't need very many tools for brick making either. There were itinerant or traveling brick makers. One of the reasons why is because all you need are your set of brick molds. You might need a striking board, something to take the clay off the top. You might need a mallet if you're making special kind of bricks where you have to knock the mold. You need a bucket for water. And then all you need.
Not sure what the dog's purpose is. He's the quality control or supervisor, but
Security.
yes, yes.
Matthew Patton's diary. He does a diary in the 18th century. In 1782, in
But
September,
you get the gist of it. This goes on quite a long time, but I just wanted you to be able to see this.
And he makes molds. And then a few days after that, he starts talking.
Okay. There's a whole series, if you're interested on this. They go through a lot of homesteading practices. The takeaway from the video is clay mixing in the beginning of the video changed to use to a plug mold, which we'll later explain. The use of molds to craft the bricks remain the same with the exception of a ganging method. So they used to mold multiple bricks in 6 frame. So to make it more efficient, they built a mold they could do 6 bricks at a time. And that worked out to be much faster. And again, I'm not trying to make anybody here an expert on brick making. And as you'll see later, it can get quite complicated in the process. But I just wanted to introduce you to some of the methods and just to see it can be pretty arduous. So, the discovery of clay in New Hampshire, and specifically in Hooksett. When we talk about finding clay in New Hampshire, it was not difficult. Rivers became the logical source of raw materials. Early sources were the Belly River in Dover. Clay deposits are believed to come from glacial freshwater lakes that once filled the present-day areas we know as Merrimack. and the Connecticut River valleys. History reports that brickmakers of that time found little practical difference in using salt or freshwater clay. New Hampshire became a thriving brick manufacturing industry on the western border of Connecticut River and the central Merrimack Valley. Did not find a lot of information about the Connecticut River Valley, so there wasn't much to read upon, not sure why. So, the first clay beds discovered by Captain Rice Dudley in 1810 were proven to be very deep and at least 20 or 30 feet and extended 4 miles north of Hooksett Village at the east side of the Merrimack River. The first brickmaking in Hooksett was in the year 1820 at the Ayr Brickyard. Not a real industry, just sort of a cooperative at first. In 1828, a kiln was built, and it was first used to make bricks to build the first townhouse in Hooksett. The town had voted to cut the lumber required to fire the kiln from the town-owned lots. And here is the Ayr Brickyard in Hooksett. So the river is in the back. You've got sort of a shed-like operation to keep rain off of materials. You've got the bricks laying to be dried. You've got a horse there with a gentleman who's probably plowing up the clay. And just gives you an idea of what things were like. Accompanying the captain were members of the head family. And there's going to be more details to follow. And the first brickyards were started. Again, it was not a real industry at that time. It was more cooperative. Different individuals united together to make bricks for home use. It was important to note that the development of fuel was much of the work than the actual brick making. We're going to discuss more of that as we move forward, giving you some statistics about how much wood was required. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the geography of Hooksett. Brickmaking covered 3 areas of New Hampshire: the Seacoast, the Keene area, Merrimack Valley area, that included a listing of Allenstown, Pembroke, and Hooksett. Merrimack Valley was the largest of the 3 areas. Records showed that in 1832, Merrimack Valley, including Allenstown and Hooksett, produced 1,271,000 bricks per year, selling virtually all of them in the local area. Now, we're talking 1832. It was interesting when you consider Hooksett was only incorporated in 1822. During that time period, brickyards were also operating in Allenstown and Pembroke, just north of Hooksett. But again, Hooksett by far was organized and operated at a much more efficient and larger scale than anything that was going on in Allenstown and Pembroke. Interesting, I did some research at the New Hampshire Historical Society, and in 1832, the Secretary of Treasury produced a survey of manufacturing of all of the United States. Now, remember, 1832, this is after the Louisiana Purchase, but the United States wasn't very advanced. And New Hampshire achieved a notable predominance in the manufacturing of bricks. So that was pretty significant. That's what New Hampshire was known highly of, was bricks. Amoskeag manufacturing wasn't really established at that time. So brick prices were constant in the 19th century, which is remarkable considering when we experience building materials and their marketplace today. We all know the economy changes. Okay, raw materials, everything changes over time. Housing market changes, building material changes. Lumber can be one price this week, can be another price. But here's a fascinating example of some research that I did. Okay, the construction of the New Hampshire Asylum for the Insane. Now, if you've ever been to Concord, you go up Pleasant Street. When I was a young boy, they had all these buildings up there for people that had a lot of mental difficulties, okay? It was not a very nice place, okay? They just warehoused all these people. Well, they started those buildings in 1842. Now, the average cost for 1,000,000 bricks was $4.12. 1,000,000 bricks, okay? The cost for modern examples of bricks today is $350 to $900 per thousand, depending on several factors. And, you know, when you look back and you take a look at this, and you say, by the way, the labor cost for bricks in 1842 was $2.25. So you could lay those bricks for an additional $2.25. Today, a mason, according to the federal labor prices, and it's probably even more than this, is $27.50, if you can probably find a mason today, okay? So it gives you an example of the cost of labor. So if you look at the map here, you're going to see Merrimack Street, which is, I highlighted it in green. And this is the Merrimack River, okay? So we have all these spotted areas, these little squares that show the different brickyards and the names of the brickyards, and a sawmill, and head is mentioned up here in the top, up at that way. And the hash marks are the railroad yards. We're going to talk more about them. And here's the toll brickyard. So what this picture shows is a lot of activity going on in Hooksett at that time. And it wasn't only the heads, but many other people were doing brickwork. And a lot of people engaged, a lot going on. Now, looking at this map, this is what we're talking about. This is Google Maps, Google Earth. If you're familiar with Hooksett, that's the district court, okay? And what you just saw, there's Merrimack Street, okay? So what we're talking about is this area. So the clay, it was on the banks of the Merrimack River, and then all in this area. Now, if you go there today, there's no sign of any brickyards, okay? There's all people live there. Now, there's some land and some fields there. I drove up and down here. There's people that live there. There's a home there. I'm not sure when this Google Earth was taken, because I think there's a lot more homes in this area. Merrimack Street goes up and connects up with Pleasant Street. And we're going to show you pictures of the head mansion and the cemetery further up. But I wanted to give you reference of this, just so that you could understand that other map. There's a lot of activity going on here. So millions and millions of bricks were being made by extracting first the clay from the riverbanks and then digging out all the clay that was here. Of course, there was no trees. They first thing they did, cut all these trees down. You know, New Hampshire at one time didn't have any trees. They cut all the trees down. Now, New Hampshire, other than Maine, is the most forested state in the United States because all the trees grew back. Thankfully. Okay, that's a plug mill. Okay? That's the actual tree they're using up on top. And of course, horsepower. And you see children. Children were the best asset for labor. Okay? This is before the child labor laws. If you weren't in the farm or doing this labor, maybe you went to school, maybe you didn't. So this is a photo of the plug mill located in Edridge Gauge. I got it right here anyway. Edridge Gauge Brickyard, located in the Bellamy River in Dover, New Hampshire, 1900. I tried to get as many photos as I could. There wasn't always photos in Hooksett. Some were in Dover, so you just try to work with what you can. So how this worked is, the mill was turned by a team of 2 horses. hitched to a crude sweep developed out of a forked tree trunk. The people were very, very ingenious. They used whatever they could find. The man on the left of the photo carries a tempered pit, while those workers on the right have a two-wheeled cart carrying off the filled brick molds. The availability of both clay and lumber in vast quantities in close proximity to the brickyards created a perfect match for the production process. Having the towns with ample manpower nearby cemented the ingredients of the brick recipe. Making the bricks in a highly manual process takes a great deal of strength and manpower. Farm animals, boys and men were required to complete the process, all of which existed in Hooksett. Besides the clay and the water, a significant amount of lumber were required, both for the molds and the drying process and the fuel for the kilns. The clay was harvested by two methods, first from the vertical walls of the riverbanks and second from the plowed clay beds in the land adjacent to the river by using horses or oxen. The clay was moved by wheelbarrow or cart to the plug mill or the tempering area. You can just imagine the back-breaking labor, how intensive it was. Okay. Yet millions of bricks were manufactured and delivered each week. And in the summer, this was 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. Nobody worked on Sunday. At least that's how things were supposed to work. So again, picture of the plug mill. You know, I want to go back to some detail and, to gain some appreciation for the labor required. After the clay had been tampered in the consistency of stiff mortar. Now, I don't know how many of you know when I use the word mortar. Mortar is what we use between the bricks, okay? To try to describe it, if you took mayonnaise and you put mud in mayonnaise, okay, that's kind of like what mortar is, all right? Or sand in mayonnaise. That's kind of like what it is. If some of you have done brickwork or cement work, that's really what mortar is. So basically, it's a thick consistency where it could be molded. The laborer, as you saw in the video, would take a lump of clay, throw it into the mold, all right? And so we're talking 8 1/4 by 4 1/4 by 2 1/2. These dimensions would vary, and you have to keep in mind that you've got a brick that weighs 5 pounds. Okay, bricks were often sold in lots of 1,000. So 1,000 bricks is 2 1/2 tons. It's a lot to move in the 19th century. No electricity, okay, no gas engines. So, you've got a straight edge, so you've got to scrape off the mold. You got to take the excess clay. So it took a special skill, because as you saw in that YouTube video, when you scrape that, you can distort the clay. And then if you distort the clay, it's not going to be a clean, and it could warp. So you don't want to do that, because you're going to ruin the brick. So it took considerable strength and skill to mold thousands of bricks. The key to the mold, no distortion, and you saw the mold was rectangle, and we talked about having more than one mold, maybe 6 at a time. Tempering, a machine power source, used a large horse and a sweep in the plug mill. The plug mill is a machine and a fixture with clay materials. You wanted to get it kind of like a plastic state, okay? And this was done by mixing the clay at an optimum moisture content, so it was forced into mixing action by the plug mill. So this was all done before you moved it into the molds. And this was better than what you saw them working by hand. So if you used the plug mill, you eliminated that molding and mixing. It actually sped up the process. So, this method was done in that box mix, and it had mixing paddles. I wish I had a better representation of what that looked like, but you have to imagine that I couldn't find any real good photographs or drawings of it. And again, the ideal was to get a consistent mixture. So, the brick clamp. So now we're getting to the point where we've got these molds, and we're going to start to bake or cook the bricks. Boys were employed in most yards, and there was no child labor laws, and they were called off-bearers. And basically, they're going to move the mold, the bricks from the molds, and they're going to put them on the ground for the drying process, because we got to dry the bricks before we bake them, okay? And we're talking about an integrated board setup, and sometimes there was bottoms and sometimes there was not used in that process. So again, a lot of labor, tremendous amount of labor. And we have to keep making these bricks because we have a huge demand. And to prevent the sticking clay on the bottom of the mold, they'd be lubricated with water, and you saw with dust or dried sand in the mold. And then these bricks were characterized by their surface, and the bricks cast had sand on the mold or sand-struck molds, and sometimes the molds would be lined with metal or iron to have a smoother surface. So this was a hard process to get them all lined up. We talked about the straight edge. Later on, in the 19th century, repressing machines came along, and they would force a green brick into a metal mold under great pressure. Some folks did this, and this advanced, and these machines were pioneered by the Shakers in Canterbury. Again, very industrious people that invented a lot of neat technology. But a lot of the brick makers did not use that machine or did not use mechanisms. The head clan kept making bricks the old-fashioned way right up to the 1930s. They did not believe in modernization. I don't know why. Maybe they wanted to keep their men employed, but they did not go to mechanization. So, human labor employed in carrying the bricks to and from the kiln. Once the bricks were fired, they were transported by labor again on carts to barges at the water in the early periods, and then later to the railroad cars. So most New England brick makers had wood frame structures to shelter the kilns and covered the roofs, and boards were removed as needed during firings. A load of green bricks was called the clamp, and it took a week to fire and cool the bricks. The brickmaker had to use his judgment to carefully watch and ensure that the perfect end product. So this is an art. So you're firing these bricks, and there's no books. Maybe there was apprentices, and maybe there was a master clamp maker or clamp firer, but this really, the baking process was the most important process. If you overfired the bricks, they would be ruined. If you underfired the bricks, they would be brittle. Stacking the unbaked bricks was a critical process. Lighting the fuel, it was really quite an operation. And guess what? If it rained or the bricks got too wet, they would be ruined. So you're working outdoors. It's New England. It could rain for a month. What are you going to do? So these are all the processes that you had to follow. You had to get the right amount of heat. If you didn't get the right amount of heat, you couldn't get the right color bricks. It was an amazing process to get the right oxygen level and to get the final hue to get the bricks correct. So this is a brick kiln. So basically the actual firing in the clamp got the moisture correct, so you get an even firing. And if you didn't do this correctly, the bricks could explode, okay? So keep in mind that the temperature during the firing process was 1,500 to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And after the firing was completed, it took several days for the kiln to cool. Now you know that when water turns to steam, it expands, right? So you had to be really careful in this whole process. That's why you probably have sort of a master brick maker that was running the operation. So the entire pile had to be taken apart, the bricks had to be taken out, and they had to cool. Then, even with the growth of the brick industry, the actual level of capital required was low. So it's very easy for someone to get into this industry. In the 1880s, the average level of investment was about $1,850. Most of the cost was in the purchasing of the huge woodlots. A few owners invested in steam engines by 1880 to operate the plug mills. So some modernization took place, but not in Hooksett. It appeared that folks just kept using manual labor. So the photo to the right is the actual head kiln from the Head family. So, procurement and delivery of bricks to Manchester. The use of the railroad was the most important impact on brick-making operation in Hooksett. Before it came along, the only method to transport bricks was downriver by barge, and it was not easy, had a limitation. Keep in mind that brickmakers had huge demand for bricks as far away as Lowell and Lawrence, with a bulk of it needed in Manchester. Now, go back to bricks and weight. Can wonder why people built wooden houses, okay? A brick weighs 5 pounds. 400 bricks is a ton. The recommended weight limit for a wagon is 2,000 pounds. Consider that 1,000,000 bricks were required in an instant. 400 bricks did not go far. So this is a picture of the Boston and Maine Freight Yard in Manchester, circa 1920. Manchester had a huge railroad yard. So did Concord, but this is a photo. So brick procurement. In 1837, the early pioneer in brick making was Jasmine Green, and he was from the Hooksett Brickyard. He developed a contract with Mr. Lowell, who at that time was the agent for the Amoskeag Company in Manchester. The contract was for a brick order to supply 100,000 bricks delivered by barge to Manchester via the Hooksett canals, once loaded above the falls. The distance between the Merrimack River brickyards was 8 miles, okay, down to Manchester. The granite foundation had been laid in this photograph, and the brick walls and windows had been framed on the left, to the right, and part of the construction reached the second floor. Construction process is shown here as the foundation and walls of the Amoskeag brick building. So, in 1878, Nat and his brother William F. Head, residents of Hooksett, were making between 5 and 7 million bricks annually, with a market value of $6 to $10 per thousand. Some records show that the yards on Merrimack Street, like we showed you in that sketch, detailed producing 75,000 handmade bricks, 75,000 bricks a day. To produce this volume of product, they employed 60 to 100 men in their brickyard operation, sold bricks not only in Manchester, but also in Nashua, Lowell, Lawrence, and Worcester. Clay pits reached nearly 20 feet below grade and required 3,000 cords of wood. I don't know how many of you burn wood, but 3,000 cords of wood cut from the nearby forest to fire the kilns. Now, do you know what 3,000 cords of wood is equal to? It's equal to 384,000 cubic feet of physical space. That space would fit in 24 2,000 square foot homes. The weight of 3,000 cords of wood, depending on the species of wood, is 9 million pounds, or 4,500 tons, all moved by hand or by horse or ox carts. People were pretty serious back then, okay? They were also pretty tough. No gasoline engines, no electric motors. Brick delivered by train. So, there were 2 railroads operating in the area of Merrimack Street where the brickyards operated. The Portsmouth and Concord, known as the P&C. They were constructed through Hooksett to Suncook Village, present-day Allenstown, in 1852. The tracks passed through what is now Pleasant Street to Merrimack Street. It went north over time and was leased out by the Concord Railroad. So a lot of these railroads you don't even know today. They don't exist. Boston and Maine bought all these railroads out. Of course, the name changed. All of this infrastructure provided convenient rail access to the brickyards, and then off that line, the head company bought a spur to service their yard. So what a spur is, you've got a railroad line passing your home, and you put a track from that yard into your yard. That's called a spur. So based on historical records, the Head family had the largest brickmaking business. There were other businesses in operation in Hooksett and Pembroke. So since the Head family was such a dominant influence in Hooksett, there was much more detail on the family and their business. In researching the records in the Hooksett Historical Society, an original order from the Amoskeag Manufacturing Company dated June 10th, 1897. They actually have this framed in the library. It came from the desk of H.F. Straw, agent, who operated from 1885 to 1919. He is the son of the famous Ezekiel A. Straw, agent from Amoskeag Manufacturing, and 34th governor of New Hampshire. So there is some nice information out there if you're able to do the research. In 1862, the Concord Railway built a new rail line from Suncook to Hooksett, creating what was to become the Suncook Loop and later the Suncook Valley Rail Line. It is important to understand that this line ran along the East River of the Merrimack, off Merrimack Street, and then crossed the river in 3 wooden-covered bridges just above the falls. Hooksett was just completely littered with railroads and railroad tracks, of which very little exists today. There's one train that goes through Hooksett. It's Boston and Maine, and it goes up through Manchester, and it only serves 4 clients today. That's it. And actually, one client is gone, and that's the Bowl Cold Station. It doesn't burn cold anymore. It's going to become a battery-supplied power plant. So we are slowly losing our railroads. Okay, brick construction. The Manchester Historic Association has an extensive collection of photos and Amoskeag records which are invaluable in historic research. The Hooksett brickyards had to keep pace with the construction of the mills, and in several cities, along with schools, homes, and churches, and even colleges. So again, we talk a lot about the Amoskeag complex, but those bricks went to a lot of other areas that I'll show you in this presentation. So you're viewing the construction of number 11 mill, looking slightly northwest from the east side. The granite foundation has been laid. Brick walls and windows are being framed to the left, to the right of the part of the construction of the second floor. Construction workers can be seen in the walls of the background beyond the old Main Street buildings visible on McGregor Street. Oops, go back, I'm sorry. This photo was taken in May in 1891. So you can imagine these buildings, and you know, if you look around this Millyard, there are millions and millions and millions of bricks. And so those brickyards had to keep up just manufacturing bricks to be able to feed this supply, and thankfully for the trains. Okay, a little bit more math. Not that we haven't had enough, but, and I'm amazed. This is an example of an actual engineering notebook that I found in the records at the Research Center of the Manchester Historic Association. Having worked in engineering, I love these engineering books. Just all the math is all laid out, and it's just fascinating to look through and see everything written precisely, accurately, and it's just beautiful. So, the photo to the right is taken of the notes from an engineering notebook from Amoskeag Manufacturing dated May 17, 1915. It is related to construction details of tenement housing. So, tenement housing, Bedford Street, you can see tenement housing. You can see tenement housing on the other side of the street, right? This was built for the people that worked in the mills. Amoskeag Manufacturing was a fraternal organization. They built housing for the workers. They described the calculation to determine the number of bricks required to construct one block of 8 tenements of housing. The total brick requirement for one block was 296,000. For 5 blocks, 1,500,000. It's all laid out. All the math is here. The weight involved for 5 blocks is 7,500,000 pounds, or 3,750 tons of brick. One can understand using trains to move this much brick was the only practical method. There were no tractor trailers in that time period. So, just moving on sort of to the final component of this presentation, we're going to talk about the background of the Head family and their business. I could do a presentation alone just on this family. They're the most fascinating group of people in the local area. This family is so interesting and important to the history of Manchester and the state of New Hampshire that an entire presentation could be developed on them. They were the Brady Sullivan or Nash Tamposi of the area. For those who don't know, the Tamposi and Nash families are the New Hampshire's largest real estate developers and were instrumental in New Hampshire's industrial and commercial development for over 50 years. Nashua and Merrimack would not be what they are today without those individuals. So, this is sort of a little family tree of the firstborns or the first male heirs that worked through the family. And I'm, not going to go through every facet of this, but just trying to highlight some of the family members here and just putting some information up here. It's just fascinating when you look at what these people did, where they came from, and the fact that they ended up in Hooksett, coming from Massachusetts, fighting in the Revolutionary War, fighting and dying, the Battle of Bennington, opened up a business, ran a hotel and bar, just absolutely amazing. Fought and ran the militia, had a family, many children, and just amazing. And really contributed a great deal. When you look at this, it was the pioneering family, and they were lumbermen. They were from Welsh-Scotch origin. The family for the next 180 years served the community, military service, farming, real estate, construction, business, local and state politics. One of them was a governor, community involvement, philanthropic engagement, and brickmaking. And William Hoyt, the last in the headline, was not in the brick business, but he was in the Hoyt shoe manufacturing business. Many of you may know of the Hoyt factory here in Manchester. So it's just amazing, the background of the Head family and what they did for both Hooksett and for Manchester. So again, we're sort of going back to that earlier map and the Head brickyards, and just a little bit, about the Head family and how they discovered the brickyards and the clay. We talked a lot about this and their side operation. And, they operated that business until the 1930s. And think about this. They had 250 to 300 acres of land in Hooksett. Do you realize how much 300 acres of land in Hooksett would be worth today? Okay. First of all, it doesn't exist anymore for one person. But it would be worth, I wouldn't even want to guess. But it would be hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's interesting that the family invested $15,000 in capital in those brickyards. So if you do some tables of what money was worth at that time and today, that 15,000 would probably be 15 million or something of that scale, right? I do want to point out, it's hard to see on this map, but we're going to go into the other aspects of the Head family. When you blow this map up like this, I apologize, it gets distorted. So it's a lot easier when you look at it on a smaller scale. Yes, and I do want to mention, as I mentioned before, the Head family never used modern methods. I guess they like keeping people employed. They just never modernized. Okay, so now we're into the other business that the Heads did, construction. Okay? So once the brick and lumber business were in full thriving operation, the Heads went into business with Frank Doust of Manchester, creating the construction firm of Head and Doust, at the time noted as the largest and best-known concern of its kind in the state. Head and Doust business had an office and shop on Canal Street and the corner of Granite, opposite the Great Railroad Passenger Station, around 1890. Too bad that station doesn't exist today. It's around where Channel 9 is, but it's one of the great architectural marvels in Manchester, but some idiot decided to tear it down. It was a beautiful railroad station. Of course, the trains went away, and so we didn't need the railroad station. But the company built both residential homes, public schools, one of them, Hallsville, the classical building of Central High, Straw, Highland, Beach, and Wilson schools. They also maintained, as I said, the office and shop on Manchester Street and the corner of Chestnut. The company was also involved in commercial and municipal buildings, the Hoyt Shoe Factory in Manchester. The original building for St. Anselm College was built by these fellows. The courthouse in Laconia, the Hillsborough County Arms House, the prison in Goffstown. I believe that prison is gone. The Henry Dorse Jr. was born in 1820 in Allenstown and spent his childhood there and died in 1910. His son, Frank, worked as a contractor. So, again, this is the continuation of that. And I did a research project, and I'm still working on it. It's been several years, on the school system in Manchester, the public schools going back to 1785. And in doing my research, I went to all the schools. The photo on the left is the plaque that's in the classical building of Central High School. And that plaque there says on it, it's down at the bottom. I apologize, I'm not the best photographer. But it says the Head and Doust Company on the bottom. So they built the classical building. They supplied the bricks for the classical building. And the classical building, which still exists today at Central High School, is built, it's a hybrid of Second Empire, Renaissance style and Second Empire, and it's yellow brick. I don't know how they made the yellow brick. It came from Hooksett. It wasn't red brick. So the clay they used and the way they fired it, and I wish I knew more, it became yellow. And if you go around Manchester, you tell me where you see another building of yellow brick. There isn't any that I've been able to see. So that was a very interesting building. This other plaque here came from the Straw School, okay? And that building is an office building now. It's no longer a school. It was built in 1895. And this plaque used to sit on Clay Street when the city facility offices were there, across from Corio Ruthier. Now, the city facility offices are in the old Siemens building on Lincoln Street. I don't know if they moved that plaque, but it's a great plaque. Again, another example of the Head and Douse Company building. Boy, they used to make nice plaques, huh? When they build a school, that's all bronze. You know, they don't do that anymore. So, oops. Another school, beautiful school. Used to be one of the oldest schools in Manchester. Now the classical building is the oldest. Wilson was the next oldest before they closed it. This is closed now. It's going to be senior housing. But there is the plaque that used to be in the school. God knows if it's still in the school now. But this was built in 1891. Another school that was built by Head and Douse. And that school lasted for 125 years. And then he said it wasn't good anymore. Whatever. But so that's another example. Now, getting near the end, here's the Head Mansion. It's a beautiful building. Some people think it's a haunted house. It's not a haunted house. It's just a beautiful building. Privately owned today. The Head family had that home built in the village area on the east side of the Merrimack River on top of the hill from their own brickyards. The home still exists. It's really on the corner of Merrimack and where it intersects Pleasant Street. The home was built by Nat Head around 1870, and it then had successive members of the Head family, and they occupied the home. Then the home left the Head family as the Head family members passed away. In 1966, a fire of unknown origin destroyed the large barn and carriage shed that were part of the original Head property. And in the 1970s, the first floor of the home was used as a funeral parlor before it was resorted to a private home and remains a private home today. If you get an opportunity and you're in Hooksett, drive by that home. Don't bother the people who live there, but you know, it's a beautiful home. Absolutely gorgeous. Great architecture. So, the Head Cemetery. So, this cemetery on Pleasant Street still exists. That's a beautiful cemetery. There are 1,613 people buried there. I don't know if burials still take place today. This is the Head family lot. So there's a chart of all the Head family folks that are buried there. I went around the lot, looked at all the headstones. The last person that was buried there, the last heir or remaining person, was 1854. So you've got a governor that's buried there. And some of the original members of the Head family. Pretty interesting. Nice place, nice cemetery, if you like cemeteries. Those of you who are into genealogy, you can do a lot of research in the cemetery. And this is another neat example. This is the Head Chapel Schoolhouse. The chapel was originally Head School number 1, the oldest schoolhouse in Hooksett. The school was twice destroyed by fire, and each time it was rebuilt, but it was closed to school use in 1912. In 1965-66, the Hooksett Women's Club restored the old schoolhouse to a non-denomination chapter. Hooksett is fantastic. They do a lot for history. They do a lot for maintenance of historical items. You see a lot of markers. You're going to see one coming up. They really, really protect their heritage. So, this marker is here, and you can't really, it's hard for you to read it. So I'll do some reading of that. But Nat Head became governor of New Hampshire for one term in 1879 to 1881 and was the first to serve as the new two-term governor under state statute. So before 1879, the governor served for 1 year. That's crazy, okay? We think the two-year governor, right? Man, you were going to vote every year for governor. Wow, that was crazy. So he did choose to run. He did not choose to run for a second term, and he was a member of the Republican Party. At that time in New Hampshire and up till, I'm going to say, the 1950s, New Hampshire was really mainly a Republican state. That's what had gone on. It was a Puritan state. It was mainly Republican. During his life, he was a very busy and ambitious man. He was a veteran of the Civil War with the rank of adjutant general, one of the directors of the Suncook Valley Railroad, director of New Hampshire Fire Insurance, and president of the China Savings Bank of Suncook. So who knew Suncook had a China Savings Bank? So, and just a side note, as an observer of an historian, Hooksett had a great deal of tragic events. Many fires and floods had hit the town over the last 203 years, yet it continued to grow and prosper. The marker may be hard to read, but here's what it said, okay? Headstone date to the early 1800s when the area was part of Chester. Hooksett settlers and their descendants are buried here to including Nat Head, New Hampshire governor, 1879 to 1881. Chester had a school on this site in 1805. The brick structure built by Hooksett in 1839 was the District 1 schoolhouse until it closed in 1912 due to dwindling student population. It was converted to a chapel by the town in 1922 and dedicated in 1966 by the Women's Club. Vacant for many years, in 2010, the Heritage Commission returned to its original use, listed by the New Hampshire State Registry of Historical Places in 2007. So that's what the marker says. You should go there. You should go up and see it. It's really nice. Parking's a little hairy. That's a busy street. There's not necessarily a parking lot, but you can park on the side, and you should check it out. So here's the bibliography and credits and reference. I try to call out everybody that helped me. There's some very, very nice people in this state, especially in Hooksett. So I tried to list them. There's a beautiful library in Hooksett. Great people. You should check it out. Manchester Public Library were very helpful. There is a New Hampshire room in the library. You have to make an appointment. There's a lot of great resources there. Of course, our own research library. We have a lot of great records there. We have all the labor records for Amoskeag manufacturing. You want to go look up your relatives, see when they worked there? We have a lot of information about buildings in Manchester and the history of Manchester. We have maps, insurance maps of Manchester. You can go back 100 years, look at the streets of Manchester, what they look like. So, fantastic. And I had many help from many publications, and I want to give them their due credit. I got a lot of the information for this. So, that's it. Here's the Hooksett Depot, 1910. So I started off in Manchester, I ended in Hooksett, and wanted to give everybody their due credit. Happy to take any questions. Hopefully I can provide the answers. And I thank you for your patience. That's it.